AI is making our students worse at math. This is an uncomfortable topic that nobody seems to want to talk about, but I am going to get into it because it's very important to me and I want to hopefully facilitate the conversation. So, several months ago, I posted a problem on this YouTube page. It was like a SAT type problem. And when I posted the problem, maybe a day or so after I posted it, I got a comment on the problem where someone informed me that they used a popular AI tool they took a picture of the problem and uploaded it to this AI tool and they solved the problem that way. They posted the answer. And I didn't really know what I was supposed to respond to that, to be honest. It's like, okay, because AI did it. The person didn't actually solve the problem. And, I haven't forgotten about that. In another instance, some students that I assist grade school, high school students who I kind of help teach on a biweekly basis or so. I've talked to them about AI and how they use it. And usually when I bring it up, I kind of get you know, smiles and kind of looks to the side like, yeah, I kind of do use it some. And they'll tell me that they do use it, to complete their work sometimes, you know, to the point where they are not necessarily doing the work. It's just they're plugging it into AI and it's doing it for them. This is something that we need to talk about, y'all. This is something we need to talk about. Now, I think to make this a fair conversation, we need to recognize that using tools for math is hardly a new thing. It's not new at all. So, you go back thousands of years and people were, using pebbles, using sticks, different kind of objects to help them count things. And then you have some civilizations using tablets where they would record mathematical calculations that they had made and then kind of refer to those calculations on the tablets, to save time to not have to calculate them every time. Then you had what's called the abacus, which is basically like a tool made out of like uh taut like strings or whatever with little I guess like stones or something on them, and they're kind of arranged in such a way to help, the people of that time to make various calculations, sometimes relatively complex ones like square and cube roots and things like that. And then you go a little further, more so when you start to get closer to modern day, I think it's 1600s, 1700s, you have something called the slide rule, which even was used, within the past 100 years here in the United States. It's like a little metal tool. I've never seen one up close, but it's a little metal, perhaps, or not necessarily metal, but tool where you would kind of slide rulers and to do different kind of calculations. So it kind of has it's like a table again of calculations, but you solve the problems by sliding the ruler, to kind of like indicate the quantities that the problem, that are involved in particular math problem you're trying to solve. Again, it could be regular addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, but then you could also use it for like logarithms, square roots, exponents, and even some trig functions as well. So again, these are various tools that people have used over hundreds and thousands of years to help solve math problems. And then, of course, you go to more modern day. You have like the regular, plain old standard calculator, and then you also have like the graphing calculator, like this one I have here, where you can do quite complex stuff. You can graph equations. You can even program these calculators Not something I actually ever did, but a lot of people in my classes when I went through school did it. But you could program the calculators to actually put other equations in there so that all you had to do is just insert values for variables and then it'll solve your equation there. So I mentioned all that to say that it's only fair to recognize that people have used tools to solve math problems for a long period of time or to help solve math problems. Now, let's talk about that. What did these tools actually do? Did they solve the problems? Have they solved the problems for us? Now, I think it depends on how you look at it or what kind of uh, uh, things we're talking about here. For the most part, the slide rule, abacus, even calculators have been used to help us save time. So you don't have to go and derive everything. You have to go and solve everything. Okay. You still have to have like a background knowledge of the math, if that makes sense. Like, for example, if you're talking about logarithms, you have to be able to understand, like how logarithms and exponents are related, what's actually happening whenever you hit log, you know, like what that actually means, it's like, what power of this number gives you this value. You have to kind of understand what's going on there. At least to some degree, at least you should be able to. Because sometimes if you don't know how to solve a logarithm, you may not know that a logarithm, for example, is base 10 on the calculator by default. But then of course you do also have the programming capability of calculators that will allow you to put an equation in. You do have to know how to program the calculator to do that. And then you have to be able to plug in the values correctly to get the actual answer. So it takes out a lot of work for sure. But there's still some background knowledge, I argue, that you have to have about the math that's being done on the calculator. But here is where AI, at least the way it's being used in a lot of instances, here's where I would argue it differs. Let me ask you something. How much math knowledge do you have to take a picture of a math problem and solve it that way? Zero. If you really think about it, a toddler could do it. A toddler could do that. So this is what really concerns me. And I can hear a voice in my head saying, like, well, the kids should know better. They should just know not to cheat and everything. But one thing I think that we really underestimate in our society is the power we put in our kids' hands whenever we give them free access to devices and even tools like AI and whatnot. Without really, really kind of being with them and showing them how to be disciplined with it and use it and whatnot, you know, because it's a lot that we're putting in their hands. So, especially if something is very difficult, if you just have free access to something that will do the work for you, I mean, think about that. As a young person, that's a lot of pressure, and then the pressure of getting a good grade and whatnot. So there to me is a very significant difference between using AI and using some of your more standard tools because like literally with AI, you don't have to have any knowledge of how to do a particular kind of math problem. You can just take a picture and feed it into the AI application and it can solve it that way. Um that said, I will also say I do believe that there are ways that AI can be used in a way that is constructive for a student getting a math education. But let's really think about this though. What is the purpose of getting a math education? So obviously, we want our kids to actually graduate. When you graduate from 12th grade, you signify that you've learned certain things, prepare for college and whatnot. But one thing I would argue that's important to know about school is that it helps you to, especially if you're talking about like reading, writing, and math, really helps to develop the human mind. Helps to develop the human mind. And my concern is that as we go more and more into this age of artificial intelligence and whatnot, and we're very focused as a society on building these tools and making them more intelligent, I feel like we have to be careful not to make tools more intelligent at the expense of actual human intelligence. Because there is a value in learning how to do, you know, sine, cosine, and tangent, or Pythagorean theorem, or solving a rational equation, things like that. You may not necessarily use it later on in life, depending on what profession you go into. But at the same time, when you learn to think in some of these ways, it develops your brain. It helps you to learn to kind of think logically. In some ways, I would even say certain math, especially when you start to get into maybe trig, calculus, they help to develop your. I think they help to develop you in a more imaginative kind of way, because you have to think about shapes and when you think about integration, you have to think about all these things in a way, almost kind of see it in your mind, if that makes sense. So math education is very important just for the sake of developing logical thinking, developing a thinker. So here are the questions that I have. First of all, what are actual helpful uses of AI? What would I think would be helpful uses of for artificial intelligence as it pertains to math education? Well, one of them I thought about was, say for example, a student was doing an assignment and they knew they needed more practice. One thing they could do is maybe take a picture of a problem, not to get the answer to it per se, but maybe to say, hey, create 10 more problems that are kind of like this, or create a few problems that are like a little easier than this. And then AI could give you some problems to solve on your own to help develop your skill. That is AI kind of working to help you as a student to develop your knowledge. I think that's a fair use. Even also with homework, there's a responsible use perhaps with homework. Now, not going and uploading the homework and then just saying, give me the answers, but perhaps, and of course, you have to follow your teacher's guidance, but perhaps maybe something like, remind me of the steps to solve this kind of problem, and, that kind of thing. But I will argue that we have to teach our students this, because we put a lot in their hands when we give them unabashed, unfettered access to AI tools at the age that they're at. You know what I'm saying? You know, it's things that you're able to do whenever you have unblocked access to AI that people would get in trouble with before, when they used to do what I think is like the same thing, which is like copying off of your classmate's paper. You couldn't do that. If you got caught doing that, you could get an automatic zero. But a lot of what we're kind of like essentially enabling kids to do with AI amounts to the exact same thing, I would argue. There may be other helpful uses for artificial intelligence with math. That will amount to, in some way, AI helping you to learn how to actually solve the problems, not necessarily solving them for you. And if you have anything else in your mind that you think would be a helpful use for AI and actually helping our students to learn math, put it in the comments. Make sure you do that, because I want to hear what you have to say, what your thoughts are. Another question I have is, what will be the effect of AI in math education within the next 20 years? Because we have so many people who are like getting deep into AI, students that are getting deep into AI right now. I'm talking about even in elementary school and whatnot. And so many students have cell phones even at very early ages where they can just go easily into Wolfram, Alpha, Desmos, or whatever, and plug the problems in. Again, you don't really have to have a whole lot of knowledge to actually take a picture of a problem and put it into, like I say, Wolfram or Desmos. You don't have to have a lot of knowledge. So, what will be the effect on society? The reason why I say this is because this represents a very fundamental shift. If it continues the way it is, it represents a very fundamental shift in how the minds of people in this society have been developed over the past, 100, 200 years or so, however long we've had an educational system of learning. So, what is that going to do? How are we going to, how is that going to shape society? How is it going to shape the regular day to day lives of people? Now, you may argue, it won't shape them much. People just, but I think we take for granted, even the fact that, you go to the grocery store and you may make calculations and different things like that, quickly based on what you want to buy, how much money you have, and whatnot. We kind of take those things for granted because they're kind of easy. But yet, we grew up, if you're a millennial like me or Gen X or something like that, we grew up in a time where we didn't have tools quite like this, especially not even in our, in elementary school years, you know. So what will be the effect on society in 20 years? Another question I have, which is probably my biggest question, is this: what will be the cost of not developing the human mind, or in other words, encouraging the solving of problems altogether with AI, especially in this age of information, entertainment, rapid, quick uh, knowledge and whatnot. I want to say rapid and quick knowledge, but rapid and quick solutions where we expect everything so quickly. What will be the effect of not developing the human mind? Because again, my concern is that we're not really teaching students. If we allow just full access, you know, at the expense of trying to help us to stay up with technology, we may end up not developing human minds. Remember, one thing I think about is whoever the engineers and computer scientists and whatnot who created artificial intelligence, they they created it. They didn't have the use of it. They created themselves. So it's like very sharp minds came together and created the algorithms and all of the different type of things that constitute whatever artificial intelligence is. So what happens whenever we're not developing minds like that anymore? Now, I'll end with this. All of this said about AI and math education, I do believe that there can be a place for AI in math education. I just believe that it requires a lot of discipline on even on an adult's part, but really with our young students. But all of this really gives me a lot of respect for mathematicians, hundreds, thousands of years ago who did math, very complex, who created trig, who created geometry, algebra, and whatnot by observing the world around them and kind of creating the system of math. I Those are some smart people, really, really smart. And so I just kind of wonder, are we are we getting better or are we getting worse as we move into AI solving problems the way that we're allowing our young people to solve problems? Just some thoughts I have. I'm not saying I'm all right about everything, but I just think that we need to talk about this. And I really think that we need to be very intentional and very disciplined with AI as it pertains to math education. That said, let me know what you think about what I've talked about. And I do appreciate you for watching.